kind of fit for that purpose. Part of that's about how we might train PhD students, so Rod's already kind of made a comment about that, but also maybe not to just think of PhD as a route to an academic career, but actually for a route to, you know, engagement in lots of other kind of careers, and to recognise that succession of short-term contracts for early career researchers actually really inhibits the ability to maintain this sustained, relevant kind of conversation, and that once you get to a lauded professorial position, it's easier to say stuff the dean than it is to say, you know, in your first job. And so I think to make sure that this is you know, our solutions that we come up with are something that are accessible for everybody within our academic community.
I was just going to quickly say that in relation to the ESRC, I think in some ways we should be quite pleased with the efforts that the ESRC manages to make in kind of presenting itself both appropriately to the world of government, because it's difficult for them to not try and argue that research is being constructed around an agenda that the government might be interested in, but actually maintaining lots of processes that enable a lot of that agenda to also still be driven by academic norms about what is quality research and what is an appropriate set of research questions. I'm not sure they get the balance right, but I do know that I think they do make a determined effort to get the balance right. And there's actually a review at the moment of all of the research councils going on, and in the Political Studies Association response to we tried to make 2 points. One is to broadly protect the idea of keeping a separate economic and social research council, because I think it's generally probably in our interest to make sure that there is a research council that deals with the issues that we are concerned with. But also we did try and argue that the ESRC should perhaps put less emphasis on programmes where it lays out what the research could be, and more emphasis on the responsive mode. Because I do think that in some ways they're missing the trick by not actually trying to embrace the creativity and the intellectual enthusiasm that comes more naturally through the response mode than through responses to fixed programs. So if we could shift that balance a little bit more back towards response mode, I think that would be better.
I've got 1 or 2 words to say about stuffing the dean. My dean's very nice, I don't feel like that about her at all. But I do feel I find myself saying this over and over again in different audiences. There's such a generational wealth gap now. And people who are in senior positions relative to someone who's just finishing their PhD, or even me, relative to someone finishing their PhD, the situation is so different when we think about what a salary, an ordinary salary, can buy people, whether they're ever going to be able to buy a house. So junior academics who are just entering the profession now are going to be so much hungrier for promotion, not just because they can have the title, but so they can maybe buy a house at some point. And so I think it's really, really important that everyone higher up the food chain looks out for them, make sure there aren't too many pressures, make sure what's requested is doable, and that we're always really conscious of the fact that life isn't like that, the way it was for us, for these junior people now.
But university administrators are not academics.
Indeed.
They are
well, they are in some universities. My
they are the
academic.
people who will control the situation. And they already have rather nice houses, most of them. And if they have degrees, they're in public administration or accounting.
Which is why we have to be the voice to protect them.
Yes. Well,
right, should we get another set of questions? There's the gentleman.
Yeah, Norman Bonney. For much of my professional life, I was a member of the British Sociological Association. And since retirement a few years ago, I joined the Political Studies Association when you came to Edinburgh. And I've got some observations, not from a fully informed perspective, but maybe they're of use. Firstly, I've been struck by the professional domination of the Political Studies Association. It's very much an association for political scientists in employment or seeking employment. There must be a much wider range of lay people who might be interested and be involved in the Political Studies Association. And they could bring possibly some of the contacts that might help in making impact. So maybe it's been considered before, but I think perhaps the Political Science Association needs to think about how it could incorporate lay members more in its activities because of the potential benefits of that. Second observation, perhaps at the national level in the association, given that there are possible funding problems ahead because of the changing position of learned journals, maybe there would be scope for the PSA to perhaps promote more day conferences where experts from across the profession can relay their expertise to wider public audiences. So two observations. Maybe they've been under consideration, but I do think it needs some thought.
I think they're good ideas.
Okay. Yeah. There was someone. Did you have your hand up before? Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to have so many diverse sort of researchers on the panel actually, and my question was sort of related to the, if you like, the sort of acknowledged pluralism that we have in political science. You know, we all agree there should be qualitative, quantitative research. You know, we can see the benefits of various theoretical positions. But I wonder, when we're thinking about impact and relevance, whether we should also look at what policymakers, particularly policy relevance, policymakers actually think is good, relevant research. And I wondered that in looking at it from that perspective, maybe the world of impact and relevance isn't necessarily an equal one. And so, I worked recently in government on an internship, and in a sense, when I talked to civil servants, they were always interested in finding sort of the latest sort of metrics and the latest sort of quantitative or even merely sort of numerical evidence of what was working, what policies were working and which weren't. And so I kind of wondered, how do we sort of navigate that sort of disconnect if we want to be policy relevant, between us wanting to be very pluralistic and policymakers maybe wanting to be slightly more quantitatively focused.
I think in terms of thinking about policy relevance, I think there is an assumed, as you say, kind of hierarchy of evidence that policymakers are interested in, and you usually think that RCTs, design experiments, quants are at the top of it. Yeah, it's interesting that this government has been criticised by various commentators as being a government that makes policy by anecdote. So, that there are, you want stories to inspire and exemplify, I think, as much as you kind of maybe want quants and RCTs. I think that maybe the way in which we think about policy relevance is maybe a little blunt, in the sense that we almost do our research and then seek to sort of have the relevance, rather than it being a sort of an engaged, sustained discussion that, from what Jerry was saying, that draws on kind of like ideas of sort of Aaron Wildavsky of crafting policy, art and craft of policy analysis, of crafting policy solutions. And you do that through a sustained dialogue rather than an audience for the relevance of your research. So I think that policymakers, there is a hierarchy of different types of evidence that they draw on in different circumstances, because I can think of a number of government policies that aren't underpinned by any evidence at all. Actually, to the contrary, complete lack of evidence or evidence that would point in the opposite direction. So I think sometimes, maybe as researchers, we become a little bit overawed or bought into this idea of evidence-based policy making a little bit too much. So there are different types of evidence that can be telling in different policy scenarios and different situations, but maybe we can't adapt our own practice until we have a more engaged, sustained dialogue with people who might potentially want to use our research. So,
I mean, the point about RCT is very now in terms of the government, is that?
To be honest, probably Peter, John and I had a bit of an influence on encouraging to feel that it was now. We must remember to put that in our impact case study, Peter. But I agree actually with Catherine's point, which is that I think that the important point is to recognise that in the world of policy there are many different players who have actually a range of different interests. And if you think about the world of policy as not just those that are proximate to government, but those that are in and around influencing government, then actually you've got a much wider field there, and also an interest in a wider range of evidence. And in fact, if you are pitching your work to the media, anyone who's ever had any media advice will have probably heard this phrase, which is, whatever the story is, find Noah. Which is, if you were writing a story about the Great Flood, actually most media people just want an interview with NOAA. They don't want all the statistical analysis about the scale of the flood and the nature of its impact and its ecological damage, etc. They want the interview with NOAA. So I think that data that talks to the interview with NOAA can be incredibly powerful and actually can make a difference as well. So I actually think that the breadth that is particularly European political science is in many ways more suited to the breadth that's required to address both the proximate policymakers in government and the various more citizen-orientated options that are out there as well.
I guess I'm biased because I use quants in my research as well as qual, and I suppose there'll be people in my department who might even call me a positivist, or I think, although that's completely ridiculous. But so I'm biased in a sense that I think we should stop fighting so much within the discipline, and then we would be able to say one of our strengths is that we triangulate, and that we could actually say bring the qualitative and quantitative evidence to bear together. We're so busy fighting each other all the time that we don't present that image.
I mean, it's just the whole area of the use of social science research is actually massive. It's touched on in Peter John's paper, and given the space that he's got, I mean, I think his summary is perfectly accurate, that there is actually limited evidence of any one-to-one linear relationship between our providing some crafty piece of policy-relevant research and something happening in government. I mean, certainly, I mean, you know, if you talk to permanent secretaries or the director generals in a department, I mean, they're urbane, they're civilised, they're well informed, they're clever. You'll have a very intelligent conversation with them, and then sweet FA will happen for 2 years.
Yeah, but that is actually a widely held citizen opinion now.
It's widely held.
The citizen opinion that they're urbane, that they couldn't organise a piss off in a room.
But still nothing changes.
Yeah, that would be our point.
But I mean, the point is, you know, what I liked in Matt's article was the emphasis on multiple channels of communication and multiple audiences, and in effect the argument is, let's just stop talking to ourselves. And who is relevant for any given piece of research is clearly going to vary enormously. I regularly go into schools to do what I hope are entertaining little lectures and encourage the kiddies to come to university. I do public speaking engagements for Rotarians and Lions, etc., etc. And I assume we have the phrase in Australia of engagement with the community. And it was one of my performance indicators. God, I am spoiled. And I filled in my little form at the end of the year. You know, I'd wasted the 5% of my time on this kind of nonsense. But in fact, it's not nonsense. I actually liked doing it because, again, I don't know what your attitudes towards it are, but mine was, it wasn't just I was, in some sense, informing the citizenry, poor benighted souls that they were. I was actually informing myself because for the stuff that I do, I stand on my hind legs, I start saying something, I finish the sentence, but the back part of my brain is actually saying to me, I'm not sure that's right. And it's funny how sometimes when you say things to an audience, which written on paper looks absolutely fine, when you start talking to a group of people who are different to yourself, it's not just your academic colleagues, it sounds different and you can't even persuade yourself that it's right. And it's Mark Twain's aphorism of how do I know what I think until I hear what I say. So I'm a great believer in talking to multiple audiences because actually I find out what I think from talking to those audiences. So I don't want to get hung up on doing policy relevant research for my urbane civil servants because it takes so long for anything to happen at that particular level. But I do want to talk to these range of audiences because one, hopefully they are indeed informed by what I say, but two, I get informed and I end up doing, I think, a better piece of writing as a result of it. And I think that's all the incentive anybody ought to need to get off their backsides and get out there and talk to people who are interested in their work.
Thank you. There was someone in yeah.
Hi, my name is Simon Thibault. I'm at the Center for Political and Constitutional Studies in Madrid, and I have a question for Jerry Stoker and also for Rod Rhodes. And my main question is, what is a problem? And who defines this? Is it the government or is it political scientists? And if it's the government, then do we follow the agenda that's been set, or do we actually, as a community, set the agenda? And if as a community we have some role in the agenda setting, can we actually agree on what is a problem? So taking the example of education, for example, declining student achievement, is this really a problem? We know it's a problem, but it's always been a concern. Since the 1960s, there's been a concern with declining competitiveness. So can we agree on the problems? If we can agree, can we agree on solutions? Again, regarding education, I've not seen any sort of definitive evidence to point to, for example, the influence of comprehensive versus specialized or selective schooling regarding how it improves educational standards. So do we actually have anything to offer regarding solutions to some of these problems, if we agree what they are?
Just, I could see that there was another question. If I might just take the last, because we're slightly running out of time. Helen, did you have a question? Then we'll get the panel to ask.
Yeah, Helen Roberts, Austrian Internet Institute.